Hello, my friends. When I watch Washington stumble through this moment in history, I sometimes think we're living through a kind of geopolitical Alzheimer's. The people running U.S. policy, whether it was Obama, Bush, Clinton, Biden, or Trump, have almost no living memory of how the real balance of power was built. And they certainly don't understand how Russia and India, and now China, fit together in that story. Take India and Russia. That relationship isn't some recent diplomatic flirtation. It goes back to the days of the Soviet Union and the Cold War. Back then, Pakistan was the CIA's forward base for covert operations against the USSR. The Russians haven't forgotten that. India, by contrast, was the counterweight to Pakistan, a strategic partner Moscow could trust. Those ties were warm, deep, and very real. Today, they've matured into something the American media can't wrap its head around. So when Western commentators clutch their pearls because Prime Minister Modi welcomes President Putin to India, I can only laugh. That's like acting shocked when two old friends gray. What really upsets the U.S. establishment is not any democratic values nonsense. It's the collapse of a long-term U.S. strategy. Washington's goal was simple: break Russia first, then turn the full weight of NATO onto China. Now, Russia is mediating between China and India, two powers that Washington would love to see permanently at odds. Instead of deepening that rivalry, Moscow is helping manage it. You can feel the foundations of that old divide beginning to crack. This is why the recent Putin-Modi engagement matters so much. It's not just symbolism. They're talking real cooperation, political, economic, and military. Russia is going to produce its fifth-generation Su-57 fighter in India. India already has the S-400 air defense system and would love to get the S-500. Russia is building what will be India's largest nuclear power plant and has already brought 2 reactors online, feeding power into the Indian grid. That's hard power, real infrastructure, and long-term integration. Now set that against what the United States once imagined it could do with India. For years, some of my former colleagues worked painstakingly to create a new nuclear relationship with New Delhi, something Congress would tolerate, something that wouldn't totally turbocharge India's weapons program, but would still bind them to a U.S.-centric nuclear and economic architecture. It was an intricate diplomatic dance, executed mainly by competent State Department professionals with some support from the Pentagon. It took years, and we killed it. All of that effort has been destroyed. That relationship is not coming back in the form Washington wanted. India now has other doors open, doors that lead through Moscow and Beijing into a wider non-Western economic world. Russia, China, and India are building the core of an emerging economic order in which the United States is no longer the center of gravity. Brazil plays a secondary role. South Africa is along for the ride. But the real power resides in those 3: Russia, China, India. Together, they represent roughly 3 billion people and an industrial and technological base the West can no longer ignore or control. The United States still behaves as if it's E.F. Hutton in that old commercial, the wise investment firm, that when it speaks, everybody listens. That era is over. Washington talks, and most of the world shrugs. Countries that used to hold U.S. Treasury paper are quietly stepping back. China, among others, has slowed or stopped purchasing American debt. We've reached the point where the U.S. government is effectively buying its own debt to keep the game going. For decades, the rest of the world subsidized America's addiction. As long as they kept buying dollars and treasuries, Washington could spend like a junkie. Wars, bases, programs, whatever the political class wanted, without really worrying about paying it back. That's ending. Other countries are increasingly trading in their own currencies. The dollar's grip is loosening. The meeting in India, with Russia at the center, is just one visible marker of a deeper structural shift. The birth of a new world economic order that does not revolve around Washington, London, or Brussels. In this environment, the U.S. foreign policy establishment is driven by one thing: money. There is no higher ideology. The national interest is whatever keeps the right people getting rich. That's why you see Congress perfectly happy to have billions of dollars flow through Ukraine with almost no serious oversight. Let's be blunt. Some members are counting on the skim from that river of cash. Zelensky's corruption isn't a bug. For them, it's a feature. It's a retirement plan. The Trump clan fits right into this culture. They're grifters operating inside a grifter system. Trump does not care about the real strategic balance in Eastern Europe. He cares about optics. A Nobel Peace Prize would be a perfect trophy, a way to declare victory regardless of what the actual terms on the ground look like. That's why people like John Bolton scream about Trump selling out Ukraine. They're not troubled by the human cost in Ukraine. They're upset that the war isn't being run in the service of their fantasy, a humiliated Russia and a triumphant NATO. But here is the hard truth nobody in Washington wants to say out loud. It doesn't matter what Congress thinks. It doesn't matter what Trump wants. It doesn't matter what some neocon op-ed in a London or New York newspaper says. Russia is going to win this war. Russia has the industrial base, the manpower, the geography, and the political will. Ukraine does not. The only way to keep Ukraine alive as a semi-functioning state is to negotiate with Russia on Russia's terms now, not later. Every month of delay only makes those terms harsher. This is not like a car negotiation where both sides come to the table with leverage. Ukraine is not walking into the showroom with a fistful of cash and competitive offers in its pocket. Russia has overwhelming advantages, demographic, territorial, industrial, and logistical, and those advantages are growing geometrically as the war drags on. By the end of next year at the latest, the military outcome will be obvious to everyone. On the ground, it's already obvious. Look at what Russia did in November alone. It secured roughly 701 square kilometers of territory, about twice the size of Gaza. 1 month. Meanwhile, Israel, supposedly one of the strongest militaries in the world, has struggled for years in that small Gaza Strip and still hasn't achieved a decisive victory over Hamas. The comparison is not about morality, it's about competence and scale. Russia is methodical, disciplined, and capable of sustained offensive operations. Its ground forces have grown from around 300,000 at the start of the special military operation in February 2022 to around 1.5 million today. That gives Moscow the depth to conduct multiple offensives simultaneously. Ukraine and the West behind it simply cannot match that. Sanctions? They've backfired. The attempt to crush Russia economically has strengthened Russian self-reliance, redirected its trade to Asia and the global South, and convinced Russians they do not need the West. Europe, on the other hand, has crippled its own energy security and industrial competitiveness. Name one thing Europe now provides that is truly indispensable to the United States. Not critical raw materials, not decisive military power, not energy. Beyond luxury goods and symbolic political cover, Europe is an overgrown, self-important, free rider. Yet European leaders talk as if they hold the trump cards. Their plan, and I'm being generous calling it that, is to pour long-range missiles into Ukraine so Kyiv can hit deep inside Russia. Refineries, factories, weapons plants. But we have 40 plus months of evidence showing how this kind of campaign plays out when Russia is the one doing the firing. Russian missiles and drones have hit Ukrainian infrastructure, depots, and industrial targets day after day, especially over the past year, and Ukraine is still standing. Brutalized and diminished, yes, but not collapsed. If the West could even produce enough long-range missiles, and that's a big if given current industrial capacity, it could never inflict on Russia the level of systematic damage Russia has already inflicted on Ukraine. Geography, defenses, and sheer scale favor Russia. In the end, war is decided on the ground. You have to move infantry and armor forward, take territory, and destroy the enemy's forces. Russia is doing that. Ukraine cannot reverse it with wonder weapons and media campaigns. Meanwhile, European elites are chasing fantasies like using frozen Russian assets to fund Ukraine's war effort. They talk about legal constructs and financial engineering as if Moscow will just quietly accept having its property stolen to bankroll weapons used against Russian soldiers. This isn't a plan. It's a legalistic daydream. They had a vision in early 2022. Sanctions would collapse the Russian economy. The Russian army would fail. NATO would celebrate a bloodless strategic victory. 2 years later, they're standing in the wreckage of that illusion, asking each other, what just hit us? Against this backdrop, Russia is patiently shaping the political endgame in Ukraine. When Putin met with senior Trump envoys in Moscow, people tasked with feeling out the ground for a possible ceasefire, he didn't waste time on petty details. They came in talking about what small concessions Russia might make, what lines might be frozen in place, how Ukraine could be given breathing room to recover. They were still laboring under the delusion that Moscow would accept a freeze that leaves Ukraine as a NATO-armed hostile state on Russia's border. Putin made it clear that's not going to happen. He did it calmly, methodically, without theatrics. He laid out the reality. Russia will not negotiate with Zelensky. From Moscow's perspective, Zelensky is illegitimate, a man who overstayed his constitutional mandate and presided over a regime riddled with corruption, extremist militias, and foreign control. Russia will deal only with the Ukrainian leadership that comes to power through a legal process, through the Rada, through constitutional mechanisms, not through Western manipulation. Would Russia talk to someone like General Zaluzhny if he were legally installed as president? Yes, possibly. Even though he's entangled with the Azov and right sector networks that Moscow labels neo-Nazi, the key issue for Russia is not personal affection. It's legal and political legitimacy. Moscow is obsessive about legal frameworks, mandates, and procedures when it comes to major international agreements. That's why Putin has made it explicit. When real negotiations begin, Foreign Minister Lavrov will lead them, supported by experienced diplomats who understand both the legal fine print and the broader strategic stakes. What that meeting with Trump's envoys really did was strip away illusions. It forced Washington's people to confront the fact that Russia holds the cards. Trump once told Zelensky he didn't hold any Trump cards. The irony is that Trump doesn't hold any either. Not in this conflict. Putin does. And you can tell the message got through because we haven't seen detailed leaks from the Trump camp spinning what happened in Moscow. They know there is no spin that changes the basic reality. Russia is winning, and Russia will define the terms of peace. This is happening in parallel with an even bigger structural shift that Western elites refuse to comprehend. For centuries, global strategy was defined as a contest between maritime powers and land powers. The British Empire, and later the United States, were the great sea powers. Russia was the archetypal land power, vast, hard to invade, impossible to conquer outright. Today, those old maritime empires are hollowed out. The Royal Navy is a shadow of what it was. Britain can't even fully crew its main warships. Its economy is slipping into irrelevance. It's a pack of corgis yapping from the sidelines of a game they no longer control. The United States still has enormous naval capabilities, but its political leadership is delusional about what those capabilities can achieve against continental giants like Russia and China, especially when those giants are working together. Surface fleets are increasingly vulnerable to advanced hypersonic and anti-ship missiles, a domain where Russia is well ahead. The underlying demographic and industrial trends favor the land powers. China is expanding its industrial reach and technological capacity. Russia is consolidating control over key energy and raw material flows. India is rising as both a market and a manufacturing hub. In that world, the United States should be thinking several moves ahead, recalibrating its role, conserving strength. Instead, it is led by people who still think it's 1989, who believe NATO is a fearsome military juggernaut instead of a political club with shrinking military capacity. They're playing a game of bluff with a weak hand while the real centers of power shift eastward. And at the center of that shift, whether the West likes it or not, stands Russia. The land power that refused to be broken, that absorbed sanctions, rallied its economy, expanded its military, and is now grinding Ukraine down while stitching itself ever more tightly into an alternative global system with China, India, and others. You can ignore that reality. You can shout about Russian aggression. You can pass resolutions and invent new sanctions packages. None of that changes the facts on the ground. Russia is winning the war in Ukraine. Russia is helping build the economic and strategic architecture of the post-Western world. The longer Washington and Brussels cling to their illusions, the harsher the ultimate reckoning will be for Ukraine, for Europe, and for the United States itself.